Hey, it's your old pal Lucid Stew again. In this video we will talk about a technique for making realistic looking wood textures. I'm pretty sure this is different than has been done previously, but you never know. Either way, this is a quick and easy method for you to employ in your content. We're starting off in sculpture mode. I have a light brown color and I'm using the stamp tool on a standard grid. This is nothing fancy. I'm going to put down a board shape and then we'll get to the meat of the technique pretty quickly. I'll skip through this. You're probably not here to learn how to make a board shaped edit. You'll want the smear tool for this and it will be surface snapped. The key to this technique is the shape that we will use for the negative smears that we are going to create. You want to edit the smear tool and then drag this sphere way out into a needle. You can use all sorts of different color combinations, but for simplicity, I've been using random brown and it turns out fine. Then we'll scale the tool down. This works in different ways with a variety of shape scales. I'll show you one way I like to do this, but I'll show another example that's more freehand later. You can also turn the whole dial all the way up if you like. The result is slightly different depending on the size of the edit you're using. And you want to make sure you have the grid off. I have the shape at about half the size of the board to start, and all I will do is quickly brush some smears back and forth across the surface. You can see a pattern emerging already. What that pattern is depends on the scale of the edits and how quickly you drag the smear. This already looks like wood. If you're happy with that, do the other sides and you have a plank in about 2 minutes. I like to add more detail to the grain by scaling the tool down, this time about 1/4 the size of the board. If you notice now, I'm not making broad sweeps across the surface but working more horizontally to try to accentuate the grain. I just scaled my tool down again, and then if it's looking too regular for you, you can make some more bigger sweeps to give you more variety. And that's it. That's the whole technique. It's stupidly easy. It does take a little practice to get a feel for it, but not much. One thing I like about this is that it allows you to be artful if you want to. This doesn't have to be a bunch of random stuff. You can be more purposeful and paint these shapes on when the tool is at a smaller scale. For materials on these, I like 40% shininess and 10% waxiness, but of course you can make your own mind up about that. One cool thing about doing it this way is that a fair amount of the time it looks better when you reduce sculpture detail. Most of my best results end up around 1% graphics thermo. One issue with these is the ends of the board, because you want grain in there as well, but you don't want the same grain as the rest of the board because the cut is different. So what I do is shorten the needle by about half with the whole dial turned all the way up. Then I tumble the shape by flicking the DS4 touchpad, and you'll get varying results depending on how it tumbles. After you do that, your result will be fairly messy, but you'll want to trim that down, and you can do that with a stamped cube close to the surface. You'll want to use some blend so you retain most of the coloring you just added. For larger, rougher posts, I use the same method, but I start out with a shape that runs about the entire length of the object. From there, I'll reduce to about half, then 1/4, then 1/8, just like with the 2x4. And the results are similar, but the surface is less neat. Your coloring is fairly well taken care of by the edits, but you can paint some too if you want. One idea I came up with is a hollow spheroid shape about the size of a streak of grain. If you run that along the grain at just the right speed, it looks a little like saw blade marks. I wouldn't try too hard to paint grain on or anything like that. One nice thing about this method is that you retain detail through all of the LOD levels as you move away from the object, and you'll probably ruin that if you get too specific with spray paint up close. At this point, I want to show you a couple of speed builds to discuss a couple of things real quick without reiterating the entire process, since it's pretty simple. Here I'm attempting to make a flooring piece, and this was a proof of concept to see if you could use this method on adjacent edits without screwing up the pattern. The answer is yes. It's not super easy to avoid overlapping the boards with your smears, but it's definitely possible. Along the lines of different types of wood, remember you can choose different tumbler colors to different effect, but you can also add color after you're done sculpting in the sculpture's menu. In this case, I'm adding some dark red, and I end up with a nice mahogany looking plank. And this is your result. I think I put about 20 minutes into this. That's a pretty decent asset for 20 minutes of work. If you know you're going to need a building block element like a post or beam, you have the potential for adding a lot of detail by trading some graphics thermo for gameplay. So rather than building a giant wooden sculpture from one sculpt and have it be very expensive, you can instead make a building block, have that be cheap, and then use enough of those to get the job done. In this case, I'm going to make a large beam, and then I will build a barn support structure from those. The result is a building asset you'll likely only use once, but it's a big part of a scene, so your gameplay cost of 50 or 100 elements is justified, but graphics cost is only 1 or 2%, leaving a lot of room for other things in your scene. And lastly, you can also use the pseudo bump map offset technique from one of my prior videos to give the illusion of extra depth, especially up close. And here's what your final product looks like. Again, from nothing to this was about 15 minutes of work, which is about as fast as I've ever worked, and the results are some of my best. The last thing I want to mention, and this is probably the most important, is that this is not just for flat surfaces. The reason you've only seen flat surfaces so far is because I didn't think this would work with irregular surfaces. Then, like a dum-dum, I decided to try it halfway into editing this video. Not only does it work with curved surfaces, it works great with curved surfaces, as you can see. The number one thing I like about this technique is that it's easy, anyone can do it, and the results are top-notch, which I think is a big win for all you sculptors out there. So in this video I showed you what I believe is a new technique for creating wood grain surfaces that are easy to do and very high quality. I have a lot of topics in the pipeline. One of my upcoming videos will focus more on materials based on an idea presented to me. I've been working with a Dreams creator that came to me with that idea. We will have a video as well as a bunch of examples we'll have in the Dreamiverse when the video drops. But that's all for now. Until next time, I'll see you in the Dreamiverse.